welcome all of you to a new video class. Today we are going to learn a short story, How Far is the River, written by Ruskin Bond. Ruskin Bond was born on 19th May 1934. He is an Indian writer who writes in English. He wrote his first short story, Untouchable, in 1950 at the age of 16. He has written novels and poems and is known mostly for his contribution to children's literature. He has more than 500 short stories to his credit, and his stories are mostly influenced by his life in the hill stations at the foothills of Himalayas, where most of his childhood was spent. Here is a story of a boy who sets out on a trip to appreciate the beauty of nature. Where does he go? What does he see there? And how does he feel? Let's find out the answers for all these questions. How far is the river? Between the boy and the river stood a mountain. The boy was young and the river was small, but the mountain was big. The thickly forested mountain hid the river, but the boy knew it was there. He had never seen the river with his own eyes, but from the villagers he had heard of it, of the fish in its waters and of its rocks. He wished to touch the water and know it personally. So here the author introduces a boy and his curiosity to visit a river which he had heard about from the villagers. And he wished to touch the water and know it personally, which means he wanted to experience the water. And the boy was young and small, and the river was small, but the mountain was big. And the thickly forested mountain that stood between the boy and the river that prevented the boy from seeing the river. He stood in front of his house on the hill opposite the mountain and gazed across the valley, dreaming of the river. He was about 12 years old, a sturdy boy with untidy black hair and shining black eyes. He had fine features and clear brown skin, but his hands and feet were rough and scratched. He was barefooted, not because he couldn't afford shoes, but because he liked the feel of warm stones and cool grass. So here it gives the description about the boy. How did the boy appear? He was about 12 years and a sturdy boy. Sturdy means with a strong physique and with untidy black hair and shining black eyes. He had fine features and clear brown skin, but his hands and feet were rough and scratched. Then, what did the boy hear about the river from the villagers? He heard a lot about it, of the fish in waters and of its rocks. And why did the boy like to walk barefooted? Because he liked the feel of warm stones and cool grass. It was 11 o'clock and he knew his parents wouldn't return home till evening. There was a loaf of bread he could take with him, and on the way he might find some fruit. A loaf of bread means a piece of bread. Here was the opportunity he had waited for. His mother and father had gone to visit relatives for the entire day and had left him on his own. If he came home before dark, before they returned, they wouldn't know where he had been. So one day when his parents went to visit their relatives, leaving the boy all alone at home, he took this chance to realize his dream of visiting the river. So the boy started his journey to explore the nature, to see the river. He kept a loaf of bread in his hand. And how did the boy get a chance to see the river? His mother and father had gone to visit his relatives for the entire day. And the boy took this as an opportunity to see the river, to go and find the river. And he went into the house and wrapped the loaf in a newspaper. Wrapped means he covered the loaf, the piece of bread, in a newspaper. Then he closed all the doors and windows. So here this line, it reveals that it shows that the boy is very responsible. He's responsible about the safety of the house. That's why before leaving the house, before going out, he closed all the doors and windows. The path to the river dropped steeply into the valley, then rose and went round the big mountain. It was frequently used by the villagers, like the woodcutters, milkmen, and mule drivers, but there was no village beyond the mountain or near the river. Now the boy passed a woodcutter and asked him how far it was to the river. The woodcutter was a short but powerful man with a creased and withered face and muscles that stood out in hard and ugly lumps. 7 miles, he said, which was fairly accurate. Why do you want to know? I am going to the river, said the boy. Alone? Of course. But it is too far. It will take you 3 hours to reach there, and then you have to come back. It will be getting dark. Besides, it is not an easy road. But I am a good walker, said the boy, though he had never walked further than the mile from his house to his school. The path was steep and the boy had to run most of the time. It was a dizzy, winding path and he slipped once or twice. The hill was covered with lush green ferns. The trees were mountain creepers and a great wild dahlia suddenly reared its golden head from the leaves and ferns. So, on the way, he met a woodcutter and he asked the woodcutter, how far is the river? And he replied, he said that the river was away by 7 miles. Accurate, which means exact. Creased, wrinkled. Withered means looking rough and old. Rare means rise up. Hesitation, a delay due to uncertainty. So on the way the boy passed a woodcutter and asked him how far it was to the river, and he said it was 7 miles. And the path was steep and the boy had to run most of the time. And the woodcutter warned the boy that it might be difficult to return before evening as he was walking alone. But the boy continued to go. And the hill was covered with lush green ferns and the trees were woven creepers, and a great wild dahlia would suddenly rear its golden head from the leaves and ferns. Did the woodcutter encourage the boy to go to the river? No. No, actually, um, the woodcutter really discouraged the boy by telling that the river was far away. Here it gives the description about the path. The path was steep and it was dizzy winding path, and the hill was covered with lush green ferns and trees were grown in creepers. Now, soon the boy was in the valley and the path straightened out and rose. He met a girl who was coming from the opposite direction. She held a long curved knife with which she had been cutting grass. The bangles she wore made music when she moved her hands, and it was as though the hands spoke a language of their own. How far is it to the river? Asked the boy. The girl had obviously never been to the river, or she may have been thinking of another one, because she said 20 miles without any hesitation. The hands spoke a language of their own. What does the expression mean? As the village girl, moved her hands, her bangles made some musical sound, and the writer says that they were talking to each other in their own language. So the boy was in the valley. He met a girl, a village girl who was coming from the opposite direction and with a curved knife with which she had been cutting the grass. And he asked the girl how far is to the river, and the girl replied that it was 20 miles without any delay, without any hesitation. The boy laughed and ran down the path. A parrot suddenly screeched, flew low over his head, a flash of red and green. The bird disappeared amongst the trees. A trickle of water came from the hillside and the boy stopped to drink. The water was cold and sharp but very refreshing. However, it seemed to have the effect of making him more thirsty. The sun was striking his side of the hill, and the dusty path became hotter. The stones scorching the boy's feet. He was sure he had gone halfway. He had walked for over an hour. Presently, he saw another boy ahead of him, driving a few goats down the path. "How far is the river?" he asked. The village boy smiled in a friendly way and said, "Oh, not far, just round the next hill and straight down." The boy, feeling hungry, unwrapped his loaf of bread. Unwrapped means open, and broke it in halves, offering one portion to the village boy. They sat on the hillside and ate in silence. When they had finished, they walked on together and began talking and talking. The boy did not notice the smarting of his feet and the heat of the sun and the distance he had covered and the distance he had yet to cover. But after some time, his companion had to diverge along another path, and the boy was once more on his own. Trickle means a thin flow of water by drops. Scorching is very hot. Presently means soon. Unwrapped, opened, or uncovered. Smarting, feeling a sharp pain. Diverge means to follow a different direction. And refreshing, having a cooling and relaxing effect. So, the boy laughed and ran down the path. Suddenly, a parrot suddenly screeched. Screech means the loud cry of a parrot. Flew low over his head, and a flash of red and green. The bird disappeared amongst the trees. And a trickle of water came from the hillside. Was the boy really thirsty? And what made the boy thirsty? Really, the boy was not thirsty, but the trickle of the refreshing water made the boy thirsty. And why was the boy sure that he had covered half the way? He knew that he had walked half a way. He had walked for over an hour. That's why he was sure that he had gone half a way. The boy unwrapped his loaf of bread and broke it in halves, offering one portion to the village boy. What attitude of the boy is revealed here? Here, it reveals that the boy unwrapped his loaf of bread and broke it in halves and offering one portion to the village boy. It reveals that the boy is very friendly and caring, and he's very kind, and he had a nature of sharing things with others. And um, so when on the way to find the river, he met a shepherd boy, and he asked the question. He repeated the question, "How far is the river?" to the boy. And the boy said that it was not far, just round the next hill and straight down. And after the boy felt hungry, and he shared a loaf of bread with the shepherd boy. And when they had finished the food, they walked on together, talking and talking with each other. At that time, the boy did not notice the smarting, the pain on his feet, and the heat of the sun, and or the distance he had covered and the distance he had yet to cover. But after some time, his companion means his friend, the other boy, the shepherd boy, had to diverge along another path. The boy diverted into another path, and again the boy was once more on his own. He became alone once again. He missed the village boy. He would not be seen. His own home was also hidden from his view by the side of the mountain. The river was not in sight either. He began to feel discouraged. Discouragement, disappointed, or hopeless, feeling hopeless. He was sorry he had finished the bread. He might want it later. So, why did the boy feel discouraged? As the companion diverted the direction, the boy was alone. The river was not in his sight, so he began to feel discouraged. He could not be seen either his home or the mountain. The river was also not in sight. That's why he began to feel discouraged. He was determined to see the river. He walked on along the hot, dusty, stony path. passed mud huts and terraced fields until there were no more fields or huts, only forest and sun and loneliness. Now there was no man or any sign of man's influence, only trees and rocks and bramble and flowers, only silence. The silence was impressive and a little frightening. It was different from the silence of a room or street. It was the silence of space, of the unknown, the silence of God. Then, as the boy rounded a sharp bend, the silence broke into sound, a sudden roaring sound, the sound of the river. Far down in the valley, the river tumbled over the river rocks. The boy gasped and began to run. He slipped and stumbled, but still he ran. Then he was ankle deep in the painfully cold mountain water, and the water was blue and white and wonderful. So, discouraged means having lost confidence or become hopeless. Bramble, a wild bush with thorns. Frightening means causing fear. Gasp, a sudden short intake of breath. Stumble, almost fall while moving. So the boy missed the village boy, the shepherd boy, and he looked up and down the mountain path but could not see no one. He felt discouraged, disappointed, and he walked on along the hot, dusty, and stony path, and he passed mud huts and terraced fields. After walking some more time, he felt he felt complete silence. There was nothing but silence all of a sudden. Then the boy found the silence impressive but frightening. Why? The silence was different from the silence he had experienced in a room or a street. Here he was alone, so the silence was impressive but a little frightening. Then the boy slipped and stumbled, but still he ran. Why? The roaring sound of the river attracted him madly. Hearing the sound, he became excited, and he was very eager to see the river, so he ran to the river. Then, suddenly, the silence broke into a sound, and he found the river tumbling over the rocks far down the valley. And the boy ran down and entered the river, and he felt the coldness of the mountain water. Then he was ankle deep in the painfully cold mountain water. He could experience it, the coldness of the water, and he was satisfied that his dream of touching the river come true. And he fulfilled his wish to see the river, to experience the cold water in the river. So, here the story gives a message that if we had a dream to achieve something, we should not give up.